Picture a universe 10,000 years from now. No computers, no robots, no artificial minds to think for you. Just people, and the terrifying amount of power a handful of them have learned to wield. This is the universe of Dune, and if you've only seen the movies, you've barely scratched the surface of what's actually going on here. Because Dune isn't really a story about one hero. It's a story about factions, ancient houses playing a centuries-long game of chess, secret sisterhoods breeding humanity toward a purpose nobody's allowed to know, and a desert people who were written off as savages right up until they became the most powerful army in the galaxy. So in this video, we're breaking down the first 5 major powers of the Dune universe: House Atreides, House Harkonnen, House Corino, the Bene Gesserit, and the Fremen. Who they are, what they actually want, and why none of them can be trusted to tell you the truth. Stick around, because by the end of this, the politics of Dune are going to make a lot more sense. Let's get into it. Let's start with the good guys, or at least the closest thing Dune has to good guys. House Atreides rules the ocean planet of Caledon. Lush, green, wet, basically the opposite of Arrakis in every way. And for generations they've built their reputation on something rare in this universe: honor. While other great houses rule through fear, the Atreides rule through loyalty. Duke Leto Atreides, the head of the house we meet at the start of the story, actually believes that if you treat your people well, they'll die for you when it counts. And in a universe this brutal, that's basically a radical idea. But here's the thing people miss. House Atreides isn't just the nice family. They're also incredibly dangerous, politically speaking. Duke Leto has military genius, a legendary Mentat advisor, and 2 of the deadliest fighters in the galaxy training his son. He's popular with the common people and respected by other nobles. That combination, when being loved and being powerful, is exactly what makes the Emperor nervous. So when the Emperor rewards House Atreides with control of Arrakis, the planet that produces the most valuable substance in the universe, it's not a reward, it's a trap. Because Arrakis is also the most dangerous, most contested planet there is, and everyone in power knows it. Duke Leto knows it's a trap too. He takes the assignment anyway because refusing an Imperial order is basically a death sentence on its own, and because he sees an opportunity. If he can win the loyalty of the native Fremen instead of oppressing them like House Harkonnen did, he might actually turn Arrakis into a real source of strength instead of a graveyard. He doesn't get the chance, but his son does, and that son, Paul Atreides, carries something extra inside him. His mother, Lady Jessica, is a member of the Bene Gesserit, and she spent his entire life secretly training him in their ways, bending the rules of her own order to do it. That decision, made out of love, ends up reshaping the entire universe. We'll get to why in a minute, because to understand Paul, you first need to understand the people his mother came from. If House Atreides is what happens when power is paired with honor, House Harkonnen is a warning about what happens when it isn't. Their homeworld, Giedi Prime, is basically an industrial nightmare. Polluted skies, oppressive cities, a population kept in line through fear rather than loyalty. And that tells you everything about how the Harkonnens operate. For decades before the story begins, House Harkonnen held the Arrakis contract. They didn't try to win over the Fremen or build anything sustainable. They strip-mined the planet for spice, treated the native population as an obstacle at best, and ran the whole operation through brutality. When the Emperor finally strips them of Arrakis and hands it to House Atreides instead, it isn't just a business loss. It's a humiliation the Harkonnens can't forgive. At the center of it all is Baron Vladimir Harkonnen, and he might be one of the most genuinely unsettling villains in science fiction. He's not driven by some twisted sense of honor or ideology. He's driven by pure appetite for pleasure, for cruelty, for control. He rules through terror, keeps his own family members scheming against each other for sport, and treats human life as a tool to be used and discarded. And here's the part that makes House Harkonnen actually dangerous instead of just cartoonishly evil. The Baron is smart. Brutally, patiently smart. The entire downfall of House Atreides isn't a random act of violence. It's a plan years in the making, built in secret alliance with the Emperor himself, designed to look like it was never the Baron's doing at all. There's also a detail a lot of casual fans don't know. Baron Harkonnen is secretly connected to House Atreides by blood through a relationship with the Bene Gesserit generations earlier, a genetic thread that ties directly into the breeding program we're about to talk about. Nothing in this universe is a coincidence. Every bloodline has been touched by the same secret hand, which brings us to the ones actually pulling the strings. Above both Atreides and Harkonnen sits House Corino, the Imperial family that has ruled known space for over 10,000 years. Emperor Shaddam IV isn't a warrior king or a battlefield hero. He's something arguably scarier, a ruler who's mastered the art of staying in power by making sure no one beneath him ever gets too strong. And that's exactly the problem House Atreides represents for him. Here's the political tightrope the Emperor walks constantly. He rules over dozens of great houses through the Landsraad, a council of nobility that could, in theory, unite against him if he ever pushed too far. So, instead of ruling through obvious tyranny, he rules through balance, quietly making sure that no single house ever becomes powerful enough to challenge the throne. When Duke Leto Atreides starts becoming too popular, too skilled, too trusted by his people, the Emperor doesn't move against him directly. That would be too obvious, and it would risk turning the Landsraad against the throne. Instead, he does something far colder. He quietly backs House Harkonnen's plan to destroy the Atreides from the shadows, using his own elite soldiers, the Sardaukar, in secret, disguised as Harkonnen troops. It's one of the clearest examples in Dune of how power actually works here. Nobody important ever gets their hands dirty directly. They use other houses, other factions, other people's ambitions as weapons, and stay far enough away that their own hands stay clean. The Emperor also has another secret weapon that barely gets mentioned outside serious lore breakdowns. His daughter, Princess Irulan, who is being trained by the Bene Gesserit as a political tool of her own, a potential bride to whoever eventually proves strong enough to threaten the throne. Marriage in this universe is never just marriage. It's a move on a much bigger board. And speaking of the ones actually designing that board, of every faction in Dune, the Bene Gesserit might be the one with the most actual control over the universe, and the one wielding the least visible power to do it. On the surface, they look like a religious order of highly trained women, advisors, wives, concubines, placed carefully inside the courts of nearly every great house. But that surface role is a disguise. Underneath it, the Bene Gesserit are running something much bigger, a genetic breeding program that has been operating in complete secrecy for over 90 generations. Their goal? To eventually produce a single person by a man, since their order can only access female bloodlines directly, who can access memories and knowledge across the entire human genetic line, past and future, male and female alike. They call this theoretical being the Kwisatz Haderach. In simple terms, a human computer with godlike insight, bred into existence like a piece of genetic engineering spanning thousands of years. Every marriage they arrange, every advisor they place next to a duke or a baron, every whispered suggestion in a noble's ear, it's all part of moving specific bloodlines closer together generation by generation toward that single outcome. And crucially, none of the people involved are supposed to know they're being used as breeding stock for a genetic master plan spanning 10,000 years. This is where Lady Jessica, Duke Leto's concubine and Paul's mother, becomes so important. The Bene Gesserit specifically ordered her to have a daughter with Leto because their breeding chart said a daughter married into the Harkonnen bloodline would produce the Kwisatz Haderach one generation later. Jessica disobeys. Out of love for Leto, she gives him a son instead. That single act of disobedience is arguably the most important decision in the entire story, because it means Paul Atreides arrives one generation too early, with abilities the Bene Gesserit intended to emerge later, in someone they could still fully control. Paul isn't supposed to exist yet, and that's exactly why nobody can predict what he'll do. The Bene Gesserit also maintain another secret weapon, the Missionaria Protectiva, a program that seeds primitive worlds with prophecies and religious myths in advance, just in case a Bene Gesserit sister ever needs to use local superstition to protect herself later, which matters a lot, because one particular desert world was seeded with a prophecy about an outsider messiah generations before anyone knew that world would become the center of the entire universe. That world, of course, is Arrakis, and its people are our final faction for this part. Everyone else in this story sees Arrakis as a resource to be extracted. The Fremen are the only faction who actually see it as home. For generations, the great powers of the universe wrote the Fremen off as a scattered population of desert nomads, useful for cheap labor, otherwise irrelevant. That assumption turns out to be one of the biggest miscalculations in the entire universe. In reality, the Fremen are the most disciplined, most physically adapted, most quietly powerful population in known space. Living on a planet with almost no accessible water forced them to develop technology and culture built entirely around survival. Most famously, the still suit, a full-body garment that recycles a person's own sweat and moisture so efficiently that a Fremen can survive for days in open desert with barely any water at all. Their eyes, that striking, solid blue color, aren't a style choice. It's a side effect of a lifetime of exposure to melange, the spice, which saturates their entire bodies from the food and air of their own planet. The Fremen aren't just living near the most valuable resource in the universe, they're made of it. And then there are the sandworms, the massive ancient creatures that produce the spice in the first place and that will devour anything that makes the wrong kind of rhythmic vibration in the open desert. Most outsiders see the worms as a terrifying natural hazard to be avoided. The Fremen learned to summon them, ride them, and treat them as something closer to sacred. But the single most important thing to understand about the Fremen is this: they've been waiting. Thanks to that ancient Bene Gesserit prophecy planted generations earlier, Fremen culture carries deep, specific legends about an outsider who will come to lead them. Someone who will prove himself through trials, who will see with a vision beyond normal sight, who will turn the desert green. So when Paul Atreides arrives on Arrakis as a refugee, stripped of his house, his fleet, and his father, he isn't just meeting a new ally. He's walking directly into a myth that was engineered for him before he was even born, among the one people who were always going to believe in him completely. Which is exactly why House Atreides, House Harkonnen, House Corino, and the Bene Gesserit are about to find out that the primitive desert population they all ignored is actually the deciding factor in who controls the entire universe. So that's 5 of the 10 major powers shaping the Dune universe. A noble house built on honor, a house built on cruelty, an empire built on balance, a sisterhood playing a 10,000-year genetic game, and a desert people everyone underestimated until it was too late. But there's still 5 more factions we haven't touched. The Spacing Guild, who hold a monopoly on interstellar travel and answer to nobody. The Bene Tleilax, whose genetic experiments make even the Bene Gesserit uncomfortable. CHOAM, the trade organization actually controlling the economy behind every one of these houses. The Landsraad, the noble council that keeps the Emperor's power in check. And the Sardaukar, the Emperor's terrifying elite soldiers trained on a prison planet most people don't even know exists. That's part 2, coming soon. If this kind of deep dive is exactly what you're here for, make sure you're subscribed, because Lore Across Worlds is going to keep digging into universes like this one every single week. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.